It's good to be here, standing in front of you, and still be able to breathe. Although I have to admit that I'm breathing a bit faster than I normally do, because I'm standing on this stage in front of you. However, today, I feel I have more conscious control over my breathing. It's not always that way for me. I was born 2 months prematurely and weighed in only 4 pounds, and I had to stay in an incubator for the first 30 days of my life. And after that, every single year at some point, I had to go back to the hospital for my breathing difficulties. I was trying too hard to breathe. In fact, the more I tried, the more I couldn't breathe. This usually lasts for about 2 weeks at a time. As a child, I always wished this could go away, but I didn't know how, and I didn't think it was possible. Because different doctors checked me, they all understood the symptoms, but they didn't understand why. So, for the first 25 years of my life, I thought something was really wrong with me physically. At age 25, I was working in Taiwan in an interior design company. That was a stressful, deadline-driven job. And one day, I was sitting in my office. These breathing difficulties gave me a major attack. The chest pain was so intense, I just couldn't get my breath right. I ended up in a hospital again. I thought, I just can't do this anymore. But what can I do? Someone, anyone, please help me. Then the doctor walked in, he looked at me, he said, maybe this is psychological. Then he just brushed it off. I was in shock. I thought, what? I have a psychological problem? What great news! Because for so long, I thought something was wrong with me physically. How many times that you in your life that you try something again and again and again, you don't get what you want and you don't succeed, you give up. So when the doctor gave me a new approach to make myself better, I thought there was a new light. So I quit my job, I went back to Canada to study psychology. And first day in school, the professor said, do not start to go around and analyzing everyone. But he didn't say anything about myself. I was doing this for me anyways. So I started to analyze how and what I was thinking. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I got confused. Most importantly, I was still living in fear of the next attack. Meanwhile, my friend asked me to join her in yoga, but she forgot to mention there was a hot yoga class. It was winter. I was wearing these thick, long pants. I thought they're going to keep me all cozy and warm. Of course, I struggled through the whole class, but I felt really good afterwards. So I started to go back the next day, and then the day after, almost every day. Well, it's not that I liked it so much. Rather, I bought a monthly, unlimited pass. I was going to make my money's worth. Over time, when I started to gasp for air, I felt I had more control without me thinking about it consciously. Because in yoga class, I was holding the posture in stillness. My body started to regulate, and that put me in a state of balance. My breath started to come to me. It was like a butterfly flown to me and land on my nose without me trying to grab it. And I stopped trying. Yoga guides me to the awareness of my own body, and fear contracts us. My body and my breath was constricted. I learned that the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. And the mind controls the body, and the body reflects the mind. That means the body also held the key to my mind. When I was in yoga class, I got out of my head and into my body. And my body opened up to yoga poses. You know what? That opened up my mind. When I changed my body response to fear, that changed my mind too. You know that one thing I didn't think I have any control over. In fact, that was one of the only things I did have control. It was my breathing. Breathing is the only bodily function that we can perform consciously and unconsciously. It's controlled by two sets of nerves. One controls the voluntary, and the other controls the involuntary. When I started to have more control over my breathing, I thought maybe I can have more control over my life and take on challenges. I started to take on yoga competition as my challenge with my fear because the result and feedback was immediate. Any thought of shaking, losing balance, and falling out of poses. You know, the thought of falling out of poses in front of many people while I was wearing something barely more than my underwear? Trust me, that was a very scary thought. And I know some of you are quite confused about the idea of yoga competition. Because yoga is supposed to be a self-practice. But for me, the word competition is the perfect setup for fear. Because all competitions leads to results. And that leads to fear of failure, fear of not being your best, fear of losing, even fear of winning. One of a fellow yoga competitors, she was an actress. She also performed on stage, fully naked before. However, she was sharing that the most frightening experience was when she was on stage for the competition. Because when she was acting, she was given a role. She wasn't really herself. But when she was on stage for the competition, she felt her heart and her soul laid bare. She felt vulnerable. She felt she was exposing who she really was, her weaknesses, her strength, and her fear. I know when you see this stage, it's like a default setup that you should be afraid. Because of the setup, the audience, the camera, the spotlight, the makeup and the hair, that will certainly give you an impression that you have to be at your best and you have to try your best. However, it's not about trying to be your best. It's about being. Because when you're being, you are in the state of the best, and you stop trying. Yoga competitors might spend days, weeks, and months to work on one yoga pose, and they spend years to change their bodies. However, when it comes to the stage, it's not about how the inner thigh rotates, nor the dazzling movement from one pose to the other. It's about everything. It's about the breathing. It's about the conscious stillness and the conscious movement. It's about the conscious decision of fear acceptance. Few months before I won the International Yoga Championship, someone asked me, "Who are your biggest competitors?" I said, "Indians and Americans." Because Indians are known to compete from an early age. Americans invest lots of time in training. And during those times, I was working really hard in one yoga pose, and I couldn't quite get it. I would wait until my son would go to bed, and I worked until 3 o'clock in the morning. But that was mostly frustration because I couldn't quite master that one pose. So when someone asked me again, "Who are your biggest competitors?" I said, "Me. It's definitely me." Few days before the championship, my coach asked me the same question. I respond, "Me." But in that moment, a thought came up. It was like, Why do you have to go against yourself? Why do you have to go against your fear? Can you work with it? Your fear is like your arms and legs. You don't have to get rid of it. Can you work with it? And in that moment, it changed my relationship with my fear. I thought, maybe I do have a choice of how am I going to respond to it. Fear is like shooting stars. It's going to come, and it's going to go. And it's going to come again, and it's going to go. We don't really have any control over it. There's one yoga pose I used to compete it for many years. And every single time I went on stage, there were two fearful thoughts showed up. First thought was, I'm on stage in front of many people. Second thought was, I'm going to fall out. And in the next moment, I'm going to demonstrate a yoga pose and speak out loud as the thought entered my mind. This is what it looked like. I'm on stage in front of many people. I'm going to fall out. Between my fear and my response, there was a decision. I can either let my fear distract me or let it pass on its way. Fear is real and is natural and is part of my life. Maybe next time when your fear shows up, you can remember you have a choice of how you're going to respond to it. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel like you have a choice. Or maybe when you catch your fear, you can be excited about it, like you're catching a shooting star. Because what lies on the other side of fear maybe is what you really want. At times, I feel unworthy to talk about my dreams. It's almost easier to talk about my fear than my dreams. If what we really want lies on the other side of fear, if we started to look into fear consciously, that might help us to get closer to our dreams. Undress your fear. Get to know your fear. Accept your fear. And notice how this affects your breath. Because the way you're breathing affects your being. In this moment and this moment. Thank you.